It was one of those mornings that almost made you forget, you know. For a few minutes, right after Stanto, when the mist was still clinging to the fields and the coffee was hot in your canteen cup. That was the dangerous time when your guard came down. The birds were even singing, a few of them, chirping away like there wasn't a war on at all. Me and this kid from Milwaukee, Schmidt, we were just leaning against the parapet of the trench, not saying much, just soaking in the quiet. It was too quiet, now that I think back on it. The kind of quiet that gets under your skin. The front had been quiet for days, a real lull, and us replacements, we were starting to think maybe it wouldn't be so bad. We were green, dumb as posts. The old-timers, the guys who'd been since Normandy, they knew better. They had that look in their eyes, a kind of permanent tiredness that went right down to the bone. Our platoon sergeant, this grizzled guy from Hamburg named Bauer, he was about to say something to us, probably to quit lollygagging when he just stopped. Froze right there, his mouth half open, his head cocked to the side, and the change in his face, I'll never forget it. It was like watching all the blood drain right out of him, but without him moving a muscle. The easy morning feeling just vanished, replaced by something cold and hard in the pit of my stomach. He didn't need to say a word. We all heard it then, a faint, far-off hum, like a bee buzzing against a window pane miles away. Schmidt, he tried to joke about it. "Wreck plane," he said. "Just one of the mosquitoes come to take our picture." But Sergeant Bauer wasn't having it. His eyes were closed, and he was listening, really listening, like he was trying to separate the threads of the sound. Then he opened his eyes and looked at us, and in that look was everything we needed to know. It wasn't a question, it was a verdict. He just said very quietly, "Get down, all of you, now." And that's when the humming started to change. It didn't get louder so much as it got bigger, wider, like the sky itself was vibrating. That single buzz swelled into a low, grinding rumble, and then the rumble deepened into a thunder that wasn't just in your ears anymore. You felt it in your teeth, a weird vibration in your fillings. It was in the ground, a shudder coming up through the soles of your boots. The birds had stopped singing. The world had gone mute, except for this one terrible, growing sound. We scrambled for our holes, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. I tumbled into my foxhole, pulling my helmet down tight, and I dared to look up. And I saw it. To the west, the horizon, it was darkening. But it wasn't a cloud front. This was different. This was a moving darkness, a swarm. The silver specks started to appear, thousands of them, catching the morning sun like tiny, evil stars. They weren't random. They were in formations, precise and endless, layer upon layer, from one edge of the sky to the other. It was like watching a plague of locusts descend upon the earth, but these were man-made, and they carried a different kind of hunger. The drone was a physical pressure now, a weight on your chest. You had to shout to be heard, but nobody was shouting. It was all whispers, hissed between clenched teeth from one hole to the next. The guy in the next foxhole over was Muller, a cynical Berliner who I thought was afraid of nothing. I saw him cross himself, a quick, furtive gesture. He caught me looking and muttered, "Chase, Holy Mother of God, they're going to wipe us off the map." It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. Another voice, thin and reedy, carried over the growing roar, "Is this it, Hans? Is this the end?" There was no answer. What could you say? We were looking at more aircraft than I knew existed in the whole world. This was the thing they warned us about, the thing we called Terrorflieger in the propaganda, but hearing about it and seeing it was something else entirely. It was a biblical flood in the sky, and we were about to drown. Then the first bombs fell. It wasn't a single explosion. It was a rippling wave of them, starting far away, a distant crump, crump, crump that walked its way toward us. The ground began to tremble, a gentle shaking at first, like a small earthquake. Then the world dissolved into noise and fire. The first close hit was a physical blow. The concussion hit me like a giant's fist, slamming the air out of my lungs. Dirt and debris rained down on my helmet, a constant, terrifying drumming. The smell was immediate and overwhelming, cordite, burnt earth, and something else, something sweet and metallic that I later realized was the smell of high explosives. You're pinned in that hole, absolutely helpless. The earth heaves and bucks beneath you, and you just curl into a ball, making yourself as small as possible, praying to a God you're not sure is listening that the next one doesn't have your name on it. Your whole universe shrinks to the few feet of dirt around you. You're not a soldier anymore. You're an animal, a terrified creature waiting for the slaughter. The sound was so immense it wasn't even sound anymore. It was a solid thing, a wall of pure force that swallowed everything. I remember wanting to scream, to just let it out, but when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. Or if it did, I couldn't hear it. The noise was too big for my own pathetic little voice to even matter. You stifle your own terror because it's insignificant against the orchestra of destruction playing just for you. You taste the dirt in your mouth, you feel the vibrations jarring your bones, you see flashes of light even with your eyes squeezed shut. Time lost all meaning. It could have been 5 minutes or an hour. You lose track. You're just waiting for the one that gets you. You think about stupid things, like the half-finished letter to your mother in your breast pocket, or the girl you kissed before you shipped out, her face already getting fuzzy in your memory. Think about home, about your bed, about simple, quiet things, and it all feels a million miles away. And then, as suddenly as it began, it started to move away. The carpet of explosions marched on, the crump, crump, crump fading towards the east, towards some other poor bastards having their world torn apart. The all clear never came because there was no siren that could compete with that. You just knew, by the receding thunder, that it was over. For now. And the silence that followed was the worst part. It wasn't a true silence, because my ears were ringing with a high-pitched whine that would stay with me for days, but it was a silence compared to what had just happened. It was heavy, thick, deceptive. You uncurled yourself, every muscle trembling, and dared to peek over the edge of your hole, and you looked out on a world that was no longer the one you knew. The familiar landscape of fields and trees and hedgerows was gone. It was a lunarscape now, a pockmarked hell of craters, some big enough to swallow a truck. The air was thick with dust and smoke, stinging your eyes and coating your throat. You could smell the pungent, acidic scent of burnt powder and something else, something awful I didn't want to identify. Then you started looking for the others. You'd call out a name, your voice a hoarse, unfamiliar croak. Schmidt, Mueller, Bauer. Sometimes you get a weak reply, a cough, a groan. Other times you get nothing. You'd look over at a foxhole that had taken a direct hit, and there was just a new crater, nothing else. No remains, no equipment, just a hole where a man, a guy you de-shared your lousy sausage with an hour ago used to be. Vanished. That's when the real terror sets in, a cold, numb kind of terror. It's not the fear of the bombs anymore. It's the fear of the emptiness they leave behind. You'd lock eyes with the guys who made it, and you didn't need to say a word. You'd see it in their faces, that 1,000-yard stare, and you knew they saw the same thing in yours. It was an unspoken understanding, a shared knowledge that we were nothing, just ants. The generals moved us around on maps, and the enemy blotted out the sky to kill us, and we were just there. In the way. The grand strategy, the fatherland, the glory, it was all a sick joke told by men who were nowhere near the dirt and the blood. All that mattered was the guy next to you, and the desperate, clawing hope that you might see tomorrow. After that first raid, we didn't talk about it much. What was there to say? We just smoked our cigarettes with shaking hands, helped dig out the wounded, and tried not to look at the craters that used to be men. That was the unspoken terror. It wasn't just the fear of dying. It was the realization of how small and insignificant your life was in this colossal, grinding machine of a war. And you knew right then that this was only the beginning. The sky could turn black again at any moment, and all you could do was get back in your hole and whisper your prayers and hope. You prepare for it, you know it's coming, but there's no preparing for that sound. It starts as a hum, a low vibration in the air that you feel more than you hear, a buzzing in your teeth. Then it grows, this deep, churning drone that seems to come from everywhere at once, from the ground beneath your boots, from the very sky pressing down on you. You look up and at first, you see nothing but high, thin clouds. Then you see them, not planes, not yet. Like a swarm of gnats, tiny silver specks catching the sun, so high up they look harmless. But the hum gets louder, turning into a roar, a grinding, mechanical thunder that pushes all other sound out of the world. And they just keep coming. More and more of them, until they're not specks anymore but a solid, shimmering sheet of metal, blotting out the blue, making the day feel like twilight. That's when the whispering starts. Not loud, not panicked, just words breathed out into the air, lost under the engine noise. Mein Gott, one of the new kids, Carl, he says it, his voice just a crack. There's no end to them. And there is. You try to count like a kid counting stars, but you lose track after 20, 50, 100. Your mind just goes blank. That's the first wave. And you know with a cold certainty that settles in your gut that there's a second wave behind it, and maybe a third. My job was different. I wasn't a rifleman, didn't have a Mauser to clutch onto, something to focus the fear into. I was a sanitator, a medic. My weapons were bandages, a pouch full of morphine syrettes that looked like little metal tubes of toothpaste, and a hopeless sense of duty. That morning, before the hum started, I was in what we grandly called the aid station, a shot-up farmhouse with half the roof gone, smelling of damp plaster and old blood. Me and the other medics, Hans and little Fritz, we were laying out our gear on a door we'd propped up on sawhorses. The bandages were so white, unnaturally white against all that grime. We had a pile of them, a big pile, but we all knew, without saying a word, that it was a joke. It was like bringing a teacup to a house fire. We just kept arranging things, folding and refolding, this useless little ritual, because doing something, anything, was better than just standing there waiting. My chest was tight, like I'd been running, and I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. I kept glancing at Hans, this big, quiet farmer from Bavaria. He'd catch my eye, give this tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head, his lips pressed into a thin line. No words were needed. That was the fellowship right there, the fellowship of the doomed, of men who knew they were about to be overwhelmed, and were just trying to steal one more minute of quiet before hell opened up. You try to guess where the bombs will fall. You look at the map in your head, you think about the command posts, the ammo dumps, and you pray, you actually pray, that they miss your little corner of the world. But that day the sky was too full. There was no missing. The whistle is the worst part. That high, tearing sound as the first bombs start their fall. It's a sound that cuts through you, that turns your bones to water. We scrambled. Our aid station was supposed to have a proper cellar, but a direct hit a week before had collapsed it, so we had a dugout, a hole in the ground shored up with splintered timber, barely big enough for the three of us and the few wounded we already had from a skirmish the night before. I remember the smell in that hole-damp earth, sweat, and the coppery tang of blood. The first concussion hit us like a physical blow. The whole world shook. Dirt and dust rained down on us, getting in your eyes, your mouth, gritting between your teeth. You're crouching there, knees to your chest, and each blast is a kick in the chest. Boom, 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 closer and closer. The ground heaves. You press your hands over your ears, but it doesn't help. The noise is inside you. You can feel it in your fillings, and all you can do is wait. It's an agony, this waiting. Because with every explosion, you're not thinking about your own skin, not really. You're doing this awful math in your head. Each one means more craters, more shattered trees, more broken men. Each one is another patient, another body, another life I'm going to have to try and patch back together with my useless white bandages. Next to me was a boy from Hamburg, maybe 18, with a shrapnel wound in his leg. His eyes were wide with terror, staring up at the shaking ceiling of our dugout as if it might cave in at any second. He was gripping my arm so hard his knuckles were white. Is it always like this?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I lied. I looked him right in the eye and I lied. "Nah, this is nothing," I said, forcing a grin that felt like a crack in plaster. "They're just trying to scare us. They'll run out of bombs soon." You tell these lies to calm them, but you're really telling them to yourself. You're whispering reassurances into the darkness, trying to believe them. The bombs kept falling. The whistle, the crump, the shake, over and over. Time stopped. It felt like hours, but it was probably only 20 minutes. 20 minutes of having your soul pounded into the dirt. Then as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The last bomb fell. The echoes rumbled away, and an eerie, deafening silence descended. It was a silence that was louder than the bombs. It was heavy, thick with dust and dread. That was the signal. That was our cue. We scrambled out of the hole, blinking in the strange half-light, the air thick with an acrid smoke that burned your lungs and tasted of cordite and burnt earth. The world was gone. The farmhouse was a pile of rubble. The trees were just splintered toothpicks. Everything was churned up, grey and brown. The familiar landscape was a moonscape. And then the sounds started filtering through the ringing in your ears. Not the big booms anymore, but the small, terrible sounds. The moaning. A high, thin scream that seemed to come from everywhere. Someone shouting for his mother. That's when you switch off. Something clicks inside you, and the fear gets pushed down into a little box. You stop being a man and you become a machine, a thing of purpose. Hans, Fritz, Mew didn't need to speak. We just fanned out, stumbling over the churned ground, our eyes scanning for movement in the smoke. That's when you learn the worst part of the job: triage. It's an awful word, a clinical word for the most horrible calculus imaginable. You have to play guard. You run to the first man you see. He's sitting up, covered in dirt, holding his arm which is bent the wrong way. He's screaming. But he's screaming. That's a good sign. You look past him. Another soldier is lying still, his uniform dark and wet around the middle. You kneel beside him, your fingers searching for a pulse in his neck. Nothing. His eyes are open, staring at a sky he can't see. You make the call. You leave him. You have to. You tap the one with the broken arm on the shoulder. You're all right, camarade. Walk back to the aid station. He looks at you like you're crazy, but he stumbles off. Then you see the next one. His leg is a mess, the femoral artery. You know it the second you see the pulsing, bright red blood. This one you can do something about. You yell for Fritz, and you both get a tourniquet on him, high up on the thigh, twisting it with a bayonet until the bleeding slows. You jab him with a syringe of morphine, the little needle piercing his skin. His eyes, wild with pain, focus on you for a second. "Am I going to die?" he whispers, and you lie again. "No, you're fine, you're going home." You say it with so much conviction you almost believe it yourself. But then there are the ones you can't save, the ones you know are goners the moment you see them. Their injuries are internal. You can't see the damage, but you can see it in their faces. A waxy pallor, a distance in their eyes. They're already halfway gone. You kneel beside them because you can't just leave them. You can't do anything for their bodies, so you try to do something for their souls. The whispers then change. They're not whispers of fear anymore. They're whispers of comfort, of lies that are a kindness. You hold their hand, and it's cold. You lean close, your face near theirs, so they can see you, so they know they're not alone. "It's okay," you whisper, your voice hoarse from the smoke. "The pain will stop soon. Just rest. Think of home. Think of your mother." You talk about anything. You ask them about their girl, their town, the job they had before this madness. You create a small bubble of peace in all that chaos. Their breathing gets shallow, a rattling sound, and then it stops. And you're left there, kneeling in the dirt, holding the hand of a stranger who died thinking of home. You close his eyes with your thumb, a final, gentle gesture. Then you get up. You wipe your hands on your trousers, and you go find the next one. There's always a next one. The rest of that day was a blur of lifting and carrying. Your arms ache with a dull, deep fire from hauling stretchers. You're covered in their blood. It's always their blood and dirt, and you stink of sweat and fear. The physical pain is almost a relief. It's something tangible, something you can understand. It's easier to bear than the other pain, the one that sits in your chest, a heavy, cold stone of grief and guilt. Guilt for the ones you left behind. Guilt for the ones you couldn't reach in time. Their faces, you see them when you close your eyes. The boy from Hamburg actually made it. We got him evacuated to a proper hospital. But the man with the belly wound, the one I had to walk past, I still see his face. I don't know his name. That night, after the last stretcher was loaded onto a truck, after the moaning had subsided into an exhausted silence, I found a quiet corner in what was left of the barn. I sat there with my back against a splintered wall, and I just stared at my hands. They were shaking. I couldn't stop them. And I started writing letters in my head. That's what you do. You compose the letter you'll never have the courage to send. "Dear Frau Schmidt," I'd think. "Your son, Erich, was a brave man. He spoke of you at the end. He wasn't alone. He died quickly." All lies. The words sounded hollow even in my own mind. How do you tell a mother that her son died screaming in a muddy field in France, that his body was torn apart by a piece of American steel? You don't. You carry that truth for them. You bury it with the bodies. Surviving a day like that feels like a victory, but it's a hollow one. There's no cheering, no celebration. You just feel empty, drained. You look at Hans and Fritz, and you see the same haunted look in their eyes that you feel in your own. You share a cigarette, not talking, just passing it back and forth, the glow of the ember a tiny, fleeting comfort in the vast darkness. That's the fellowship, too, the shared burden, the unspoken understanding that we'd all have to get up and do it again tomorrow. You learn the dark humor, the jokes that aren't really funny, but they keep you from screaming. You get homesick for stupid things, the taste of real coffee, the smell of your mother's laundry, the feel of a clean shirt on your back. You give anything to be anywhere else, to be anyone else. War isn't about grand strategies or flags on a map. It's about this. It's about the taste of dust in your mouth, the smell of blood and burnt powder, the sound of a man's last breath, and the crushing weight of 1,000 small decisions you never wanted to make. It's about waiting in a hole in the ground, listening to the sky tear itself apart, and then scrambling out to try and put the pieces back together, knowing all the while that you can't. You can only whisper a few words of comfort, hold a hand, and carry the weight of it all for the rest of your life. That's what they don't tell you. They don't tell you that even if you survive, you never really leave that field. You never stop hearing the whispers. You get a feeling for it after a while, a sort of itch between your shoulder blades that the sky is about to fall. The replacements, the greenhorns, they were still whistling, maybe thinking about a letter from home or what was in the canned beef. But the rest of us, the guys who'd been at this since the Ardennes or Normandy, we were quiet. You'd see Feldwebel Weber, a man who'd chewed nails for breakfast since '39, standing by the command post, not looking at anything in particular, just listening. His head was cocked, and his fingers were drumming a nervous little tattoo on his thigh. The radio traffic picked up too, not the usual bored drone, but quick, sharp exchanges, voices tinny and tight with a tension you could feel even from 20 feet away. And then, without a word, Schmidt, the old hand from my unit, he just got up from where he was cleaning his rifle, picked up his shovel, and started deepening his foxhole. Just like that. No order, no alarm. It was a language we all understood, a quiet ballet of impending doom. I remember this one kid, couldn't have been more than 18, his uniform still stiff and clean. He looks at Schmidt digging and says, "Hey, Alt, is it going to rain?" He thought the digging was for drainage. I almost laughed, but it got stuck in my throat. I just pointed a thumb towards the west, towards the low, steady rumble that had been building for the last 10 minutes. "That's not thunder, boy," I told him, my voice sounding rougher than I meant it to. "That's Pratt and Whitney. That's a whole damn factory of engines. That's them." His face went blank for a second, then the color just drained away like someone had pulled a plug. His eyes got wide, and he started scanning the empty blue sky like he was trying to see the sound. That's when you know you're new, when you still expect to see them before you hear them. We knew. The hum was already in our bones, a vibration you felt more than heard, the way an animal senses an earthquake coming. So you do what you've learned to do. You go through the motions. That's the real soldiering, not the heroics they put on the posters, but the numb, practiced routine of making yourself a smaller target. I found my spot, the deepest part of the trench where the earth was cool and smelled of damp clay and old roots. I settled my back against the dirt wall, the gritty soil crumbling down the collar of my tunic. My hands moved on their own, padding my pockets for my cigarettes, pulling one out, the paper slightly damp, then the scratch of the match, the flare of sulfur that for a blessed second overpowered the smells of mud and sweat. I cupped the flame, took that first long drag, feeling the smoke burn deep into my lungs. It was a ritual, a tiny, defiant act of normalcy in the face of the absurd. And you watch the new guys. You watch them scramble. They're like ants when you kick their hill, running this way and that, eyes wild, fumbling with their helmets, their shouts high-pitched and panicked. I saw that kid, the one who asked about the rain, just frozen solid, staring up at the sky with his mouth hanging open. And I remembered. God, I remembered being that scared. I remembered my first time in France when the Jabos came screaming down. I'd pissed myself, plain and simple, shaking so bad I could barely hold my rifle. There's no shame in it, not really. It's just your body telling you you're still alive, that you have something to lose. Now the fear was different. It was a cold stone in my gut, a heavy, familiar weight. It wasn't panic anymore. It was resignation. You just sit there smoking, and the thought rolls through your head, calm and clear as a church bell. Well, here we go again. Another raid. Another entry in some clerk's ledger. Another day to just endure. You stop thinking about winning or losing, about flags and fatherlands. You think about the next minute, the next breath. That's the only victory that means anything. But the cynicism, that hardened shell you build around yourself, it's thin as eggshell. No matter how many times you tell yourself it's just noise, just statistics, your mind betrays you. The second that drone turns from a hum to a specific, earth-shaking roar, it flashes you back. You see things. This time it was France. Big France Becker, with a laugh that could shake the leaves off a tree. Used to play the accordion, badly but with so much joy, and he always had a dirty joke ready. We were dug in near a hedgerow last spring, the air sweet with apple blossoms, can you believe it? Apple blossoms. The bombers came, lower that time, fighter bombers, and there was a whistle that seemed to zero in on our very souls. The world exploded in dirt and fire. When the ringing in my ears subsided and the dirt stopped falling, I looked over. France was just gone. Where he'd been standing was a crater. All that was left was a scrap of his tunic caught on a splintered branch, and the smell of cordite and blood, a sweet, coppery smell I can still taste in the back of my throat if I think about it. And his laugh. That big, booming laugh was just silenced, snuffed out. As the first specks appeared, tiny and innocent like a swarm of gnats way up high, I found my lips moving. I was whispering his name. France. Just a breath, really. A stupid, superstitious thing. Like a prayer or a talisman, as if saying his name could build a wall between me and the shrapnel, between me and the fire. You hang on to those ghosts. They're the only ones who truly understand. Then the world dissolves into noise. The first formations were overhead, a vast, unbelievable constellation of silver crosses against the blue. The gentle hum was now a deafening, ripping thunder that made the very air shudder. You stop hearing it as sound. You feel it in your teeth, in the fillings in your teeth. The ground starts to tremble, and the kids, they lose it entirely. They're crying, praying. One of them was just screaming, a high, endless keen like a wounded animal. There was no sergeant nearby, no officer to take charge. They were just boys, fresh from the Hitler Youth parades, taught to die for the glory of the Reich, but no one ever taught them how to be this terrified, how to sit in a hole in the ground while the sky tries to kill you. So you do it. You become the sergeant, even if your stripes were lost in the mud at Kharkov. Your body moves on an old instinct. I scrambled over, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I grabbed the screamer by his tunic, shaking him hard. "Shut up! Shut your mouth and get down, you idiot! You want to give them a target," I barked, my voice a ragged growl I barely recognized. The boy with the clean uniform was curled into a ball, shaking uncontrollably. I knelt down, the dirt cold and gritty under my knees, and I put a hand on his shoulder. It was quivering like a captured bird. "Easy, son. Easy now. Just keep your head down. Breathe. It'll pass. It always passes." The words were hollow, empty comforts. I knew they were lies. It doesn't pass. It just stops for a while, leaving you hollowed out and waiting for the next time. But you say them anyway. That's the burden you carry, the leadership without the rank. You do it because someone has to, because the alternative is watching them break completely. And in that moment, patting his shaking shoulder, offering those meaningless words, I felt the heaviest weight of all. It wasn't the fear of dying. It was the crushing knowledge that if you did survive, if you made it through this particular hell, all it meant was that you got to do it all over again tomorrow. Survival wasn't a hope, it was a sentence. You just prayed the next day's quote of death had someone else's name on it, all the while knowing that with each passing raid, the odds got thinner, the list of names you whispered grew longer, and the boy you used to be got left further and further behind, buried under the endless tons of cold, hard steel falling from the sky. My dearest Alina, I started writing this letter to you 100 times in my head today, trying to find the right words to make this place feel less like a nightmare and more like an adventure. Something you could read over tea back home without your hands shaking. The sun was actually out for once, warming the back of my neck, and the field in front of me, this little corner of France we're dug into, was almost peaceful. I was composing sentences about the ridiculous red poppies growing right out of the churned-up earth, a splash of color against all this mud and gloom, and how the air almost smelled clean, like grass and damp soil, instead of cordite and decay. I was going to tell you about the distant rumble of the front, miles away, a constant low grumble we'd learned to ignore, like city folks learn to ignore the noise of traffic. That was the lie I was crafting for you, the story of a quiet sector, a safe little pocket where the war felt distant, just to let you sleep a little easier at night. I had it all mapped out in my mind, the cheerful nonsense about how my biggest worry was the damn coffee tasting like mud, and how Smitty was snoring so loud last night he probably alerted the whole German army. I was smiling to myself, thinking how you'd chuckle at that, how the worry lines around your eyes might soften for just a moment. And then the air raid siren tore the world in two. That sound, it's not just a noise, it's a physical thing, a cold wire that shoots right down your spine and freezes your guts solid. 1 second, quiet, the next, that rising and falling wail that shreds any illusion of peace into bloody confetti. The peaceful French countryside my letter was describing just vanished, swallowed whole by that scream from the watchtower. My heart, which had been beating slow and steady, just hammered against my ribs like it was trying to bust out and run for cover on its own. I could see the other guys, a moment before lounging, smoking, playing cards on an upturned crate, now scrambling, a swarm of ants kicked from their hill. All the calm I'd been pretending to feel evaporated like a puddle on a hot pavement. I fumbled with the imaginary letter in my mind, folding it away, a stupid, pointless gesture, a promise to myself I'll finish it later if there is a later. That if is the biggest word in this war, Alina. It hangs over every single thing we do. Then came the drone. At first, it was just a low hum like a far-off beehive, but it didn't stay far-off for long. It grew and grew, not so much getting louder as it was getting heavier, pressing down on us, filling the whole sky until there was no room for anything else, not even a thought. We were all crammed into the trench, pressed against the cold, wet earth, and I pulled your photograph from my breast pocket. The one from the county fair, with you squinting a little in the sun, your hair tucked behind your ear, that shy smile I fell in love with. I clutched it in my hand so tight I'm surprised I didn't crumple the paper. My hands were trembling, a shaky vibration I felt all the way up my arms. This is the truth I could never, ever put in a letter to you. I wasn't whispering your name like some romantic hero in a picture show. It was a plea, a desperate, final chant into the void. Alina, 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 over and over like a prayer, but without any real faith behind it, just raw, animal fear. The smell was the worst part, the damp wool of our uniforms, the sharp tang of cold sweat, the coppery taste of terror in my own mouth. And underneath it all, the rich, rotten smell of the earth itself, the grave we were all standing in. I could hear the guys around me, not words, just sounds. A low groan from Peterson, a string of curses from Murphy that was more like a prayer to a god he didn't believe in, the quick, shallow breathing of a kid next to me who couldn't have been more than 18, his face pale as chalk. And then I had this thought, Alina, a thought so shameful and selfish I'd rather die than have you know it, but it's the truth of that moment. I thought, if a bomb lands right here, if I'm just erased, you will never know. You'll get a neatly typed telegram saying I died bravely for my country, and you'll picture a clean shot, a quick end, a hero's farewell. You'll never know the truth of its sheer, pitiapant's terror, the smell of the mud I'd be buried in, the sound of my own whimpers drowned out by the engines of death overhead. You'd be spared that horrible, specific image, and for a single, fleeting second, I was grateful for that. Grateful that my annihilation would be a sanitized story for you. The shame of that thought burned in me almost as bad as the fear. That's when I realized the fear wasn't really about dying. Oh, I was scared of that, don't get me wrong. The idea of nothingness, of everything just stopping, is a cold hand around your heart. But the fear that was worse, the one that truly froze me solid, was the fear of being forgotten. Of becoming just a name on a casualty list, a statistic, a gold star in a window that people would glance at with a sigh before going on with their lives. I saw it so clearly, Alina, like a newsreel playing right in front of my eyes. I saw the boy from the Western Union walking up the path to our front door, the one I painted just last spring. I saw you answering, wiping your hands on your apron, your face full of hope that it was a letter from me, and then watching that hope die as you read those sterile, bureaucratic words. I saw your life shattering right there on the porch, and the thought of causing you that much pain was 1,000 times worse than any shell. That's the fear worse than death. It's not your own end, it's the hole you leave behind in the people who love you. Right then, I started bargaining with God, with the universe, with anything that might be listening. I wasn't noble. I didn't promise to be a better man or join the priesthood. I promised anything, everything I'd give my right arm. I'd never complain about anything again. I'd scrub floors for the rest of my life just for one more chance. One more chance to see your face, not in a faded photograph, but in the flesh. To hear your laugh, a real laugh, not the polite one you use in company. To feel the weight of your head on my shoulder. That was the price I was willing to pay for my life, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. The sky, God, the sky. We finally dared to look up, just a sliver of an eye over the lip of the trench, and what I saw I still can't properly describe. It was like a storm cloud, but moving with a terrible, purposeful slowness. A dark swarm of them, hundreds, maybe thousands, Allied bombers, flying so high they were just silver specks, but there were so many they literally blotted out the sun. The sound wasn't a drone anymore. It was a solid wall of noise, a deep, rhythmic thunder that vibrated in your teeth, in the bones of your skull. You couldn't hear the guy next to you shouting, you just felt the roar. We weren't their target, not today. They were headed deeper inland, to smash some city, some factory, some rail yard to pieces. But in that moment, watching that armada of our own planes fill the heavens, I didn't feel pride. I felt a sick, helpless smallness. I understood for the first time what the German soldiers must have whispered when they saw this sight. It wasn't about armies or nations. It was about the end of the world arriving on your doorstep. It was awe, the kind that sucks the soul right out of you. There was no fighting that. There was just hiding and praying and waiting to see if death would fall on you by accident, a stray parcel of high explosives meant for someone else. We were just ants on the ground, and the boot was coming down somewhere nearby. The ground started to tremble, a faint shudder at first, then a constant, rolling quake as the bombs found their target miles away. Each distant, muffled crump was a town square, a street, a home, a life, being obliterated. We sat there in our hole, listening to the symphony of destruction, feeling the earth itself groan in protest. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The last wave passed, the thunder faded to a rumble, then to a hum, and then, blessedly, to silence. The all-clear siren sounded, weak and pathetic after the roar of the engines. For a long time, nobody moved. We were all just waiting for our hearts to slow down, trying to remember how to breathe like normal men and not cornered animals. Silence was almost as loud as the bombs. Slowly, stiffly, we untangled ourselves from the mud. My legs felt like jelly. I looked around at the faces of my buddies-bale, drawn, eyes wide with the shock of still being alive. Somebody cracked a joke, something dark and grim about the Luftwaffe being late for the party, and a few of us laughed, a raw, hacking sound that had no joy in it, just relief. That's soldiering, Elena. You find a sliver of humor in the mouth of hell, because if you don't, you'll go mad. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the real letter I'd been writing to you this morning, before it all started. The paper was crumpled, smeared with mud from my trembling hand. I looked at the words I'd so carefully penned. My dearest, it's another beautiful day here. Lies. Every word of it was a lie. The words that had felt so important just an hour ago were now meaningless, a testament to a peace that had never existed. I couldn't send that. I couldn't send the truth either, the one screaming in my head. So I did what soldiers have always done. I made a decision. I folded that mud-stained letter, that unsent truth, and I tucked it deep into my pocket, a secret weight against my chest. I took a deep breath, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and I started again. Dearest Elena, you'll never believe it, but we had quite a show today. A whole fleet of our bombers flew over, a real sight to see. I wrote a new letter, a cheerful letter, a small, desperate act of defiance against the terror. I told you about the poppies. I made a joke about Smitty's snoring. I asked about your garden. I created a world for you that was safer, simpler, a world where your husband wasn't a terrified man crouching in a hole. That unsent letter, the one with the truth of my trembling hand and the shameful thoughts, became a burden I promised myself I would carry alone. It was my job, my duty, to keep you safe from the horror, even if the only thing I could protect was your peace of mind. That crumpled paper in my pocket felt heavier than my rifle, heavier than my pack. It was the weight of love, I suppose, a love that meant lying so that you could still believe in a world where the sky was just the sky and not a bringer of ruin. And I carried that weight every single day, until the day, by some miracle, I finally made it home to you. You think you're safe inside a tank. That's the first lie they tell you, and you believe it because you have to. All that steel, inches thick, the roar of the Maybach engine, the weight of the unit makes you feel like a god, like some invincible metal giant rolling across the countryside. We were kings of the road, my crew and me, in our Panzer IV. We'd seen action, sure, taken a few hits that left scars on the paint and gave us a story to tell, but we'd always driven away. That arrogance, that armored confidence, it's what gets you killed. I remember that day started like any other, a low rumble in the distance that we'd learned to ignore. Intel said the Jabos fighter bombers were busy elsewhere. We were supposed to be part of a counter-push, a big fist of steel meant to punch a hole in their lines. We were rolling through this French farmland, the dust from the tracks in front of us coating our vision slits in a fine yellow powder. Then the engine note changed. Up front, Klaus, our driver, he heard it first. A low hum, like a far-off beehive, but it didn't fade. It grew, it multiplied. It became a vibration you felt in your teeth, deep in your bones. The order crackled over the radio net, not from our commander, but from the battalion lead, his voice tight. Scatter, off the road, take cover. But where do you take cover when you're a fortifivetan behemoth in the middle of an open field? Klaus wrestled with the steering levers, swinging us off the track, crushing a low stone wall into gravel, lurching us under the scant cover of a couple of walnut trees. And then he killed the engine. The sudden silence was louder than the roar had been. That's when the real fear started. The hum was no longer a hum. It was the sky tearing apart, a solid, endless drone that came from everywhere at once. You couldn't see them yet, but you knew. The flying fortresses, hundreds of them. The commander, Willie, was standing in the cupola, and I heard his breath catch. Mein Gott, he whispered, and that was all. He didn't need to say more. He dropped down into the turret, his face the color of chalk, and slammed the hatch shut. The heavy clunk of the locking mechanism turning was the sound of our coffin lid closing. One by one, we all dogged our hatches, Klaus down in his driver's compartment. Hans, the radio operator in the hull, me in the loader's station, and Willie and Erich, the gunner, in the turret. We were sealed in. The world went from the dusty light of a French summer day to the hellish gloom of our metal tomb. The only light came from the faint glow of the gun sight and the little shaded bulb by the radio. It was instantly, unbearably hot. The air, which before had been fresh with the smell of oil and gasoline, turned thick with the stink of sweat and fear. You could taste it, a coppery tang on your tongue. We were 5 men, suddenly trapped in a sweating, breathing, trembling box. The first sound wasn't the bombs. It was the shrapnel. Before the bombs even hit the ground, the sky was full of flak, our own flak, trying to cut a path through them. The spent shell casings and fragments from the bursts started raining down on the hull. Began as a gentle pitter-patter, like hard rain on a tin roof, and then it escalated into a deafening, insane cacophony. It was like 1,000 blacksmiths had surrounded us and were beating on our hull with sledgehammers, a relentless, ringing clangor that made thinking impossible. You had to shout to be heard, even over the intercom. The headphones clamped to my ears were filled with the ragged breathing of my crewmates and the constant, nerve-shredding ping, bang, crack of metal hitting our steel skin. Willie's voice trying to stay calm. Everyone report in. Driver. A pause, then Klaus, his voice tight. Still here. Radio operator. Here, from Hans, his voice barely a whisper. Gunner. Erich, a man of few words, just grunted. Ja. Loader. I'm here, Willie, I said, and my own voice sounded thin and young, even to me. We did this every few minutes, a ritual, a way of clinging to each other in the darkness. It was the only thing that felt real. And then the bombs came. The first ones were far away, a series of deep, rolling crumps that we felt more than heard, a pressure change that made our ears pop. But the wave was coming. You could hear it walking towards you, a wall of pure destruction chewing up the earth. The next salvo was closer. The tank shuddered, not from a hit, but from the concussion. Dirt and stones peppered the hull. A near miss. That was the worst, the anticipation. You give anything for it to just be over, and that's when the sick thought enters your mind. You start praying for a direct hit. It sounds crazy, blasphemous even, but in that hot, dark box, it was the only logic that made sense. A near miss could blow a track, buckle the armor, jam the hatches. It could turn us into an oven, roasting us alive inside this steel box. We'd all seen it. The tanks burned out from the inside, the horrible, blackened things that were once men fused to their stations. But a direct hit from one of those big bombs would just erase us. It would be quick. A flash and then nothing. No pain, no burning. So you sit there, sweating, flinching with every hammer blow on the hull, and you whisper to yourself, "Come on, you army bastard, hit me, make it clean." The world exploded. It wasn't a sound. It was the end of sound. A bomb hit so close that the tank was lifted, thrown sideways like a toy. I was slammed against the breech of the main gun, my shoulder exploding in pain. The floor rose up to meet me, then fell away. We were tilting, listing to one side. For a terrifying second, I thought we were going to roll over, and if we did, we were finished. The lights flickered and died, plunging us into absolute blackness. The intercom hissed with static. In the dark, I could hear someone moaning, a low, animal sound of pure terror. I think it might have been me. Dust and cordite smoke filled the air, choking us, making us cough and gasp. And then, in the silence that followed the cataclysm, a new sound. A voice, quiet, steady, cutting through the panic. It was Erich, our gunner. Old hair, a veteran from Africa, a man who'd seen everything and whose face was a roadmap of scars and wrinkles. He wasn't a religious man. I'd never heard him speak of God. But there in the darkness, with the bombs still falling around us, he began to recite the Lord's Prayer. Vater unser, der du bist I am Himmel. His voice was a dry rasp, but it was firm. Geheiligt word dein name. One by one, we joined in. Klaus from his driver's hole, Hans from the radio, Willie beside him, and me, my voice trembling. Dein Reich kam, dein will Gesche, why I am Himmel so off Erden. It wasn't a prayer of piety. It was a mantra, a rope we held onto in the dark. It was the only thing we had left. The bombing went on for an eternity. Maybe it was 10 minutes, maybe it was an hour. Time lost all meaning. You just existed in a state of pure sensation. The smell of your own fear, the taste of dust and blood from a bitten lip, the deafening noise, the violent lurching of the world, the hard, unyielding metal you clung to. You think of stupid things. I thought about the apple tree behind my parents' house. I thought about the girl I'd kissed before I shipped out, the smell of her perfume. I thought about the bottle of cognac we'd looted from a farmhouse, still unopened under my seat. You cling to these tiny, insignificant details because the big picture war, the bomb, the likelihood of death is too vast and terrible to comprehend. Finally, the hammering on the hull began to slacken. The bombs walked away, their terrible music fading into the distance, leaving behind a silence that was somehow more terrifying. It was a ringing, hollow silence, broken only by the crackle of fires somewhere outside. We were still alive. The realization didn't bring relief, only a new kind of fear. What was left out there? Were we the only ones? Willie was the first to move. Everyone all right? He asked, his voice raw. A chorus of groans and affirmations answered him. Erich, can you get the auxiliary power on? A click, a whine, and the faint interior lights flickered back to life. The sight was surreal. The inside of the tank was a shambles. Everything not bolted down was thrown around. My helmet was across the turret. A map was draped over the gun breech. We were all covered in a fine layer of dust, our faces streaked with sweat and grime, making us look like ghosts. Willie slowly, cautiously, undogged the commander's hatch and pushed it open. A sliver of dim, strange light fell into the turret. He hesitated, then lifted his head out. He didn't say anything for a long time. What is it? I asked, my voice cracking. What do you see? He just shook his head, his face a mask of disbelief. You have to see for yourself, he said quietly. One by one, we crawled out of our hatches, moving stiffly like old men. The fresh air hit me like a physical blow. It was cold, and it stank of smoke, burnt rubber, and something else, something sweet and foul that I didn't want to identify. I stood on the deck of our tank, my legs shaking so badly I had to grab onto the cupola for support. The world I saw was not the world we had entered just an hour before. It was an alien planet, a landscape of the moon. The green fields were gone, replaced by a pockmarked wasteland of craters, some so deep you could have buried a truck in them. The walnut trees we'd sheltered under were splintered stumps. The stone wall was pulverized. And then I saw the others. A panzer from our company, maybe 30 meters away, had taken a direct hit. The turret was gone, completely blown off, and the hull was a blackened, twisted wreck, peeled open like a tin can. There was no movement. Further on, another one was burning, a thick column of black oil smoke rising into the sky. We were the lucky ones. Our tank was crippled, own track was off, and we were tilted at a crazy angle, but we were intact. We were alive. The 5 of us stood there on the scarred steel of our vehicle, not saying a word. There was nothing to say. We just looked at each other, and in each other's eyes we saw the same hollowed-out reflection of what we had just endured. The bond we had wasn't from the battles we'd fought together, from the tanks we'd knocked out. It was forged right there, in that helpless, shared terror, trapped in a steel coffin while the world ended outside. We had faced the absolute worst together, and we had, by some miracle, survived. Klaus pulled out a crumpled pack of cigarettes, his hands trembling so much he could barely light one. He passed it around, each of us taking a drag, the smoke burning our lungs, but feeling like a promise that we were still among the living. We didn't talk about the men in the other tanks. We didn't talk about the war. We just stood in the eerie silence of that ruined field, 5 young men who had aged 100 years in an afternoon, waiting for orders, waiting for rescue, waiting for nothing, just grateful, in a sick, broken way, to be breathing the poisoned air. You never forget the sound. Even now, all these years later, a certain kind of low-flying plane or a loud noise can bring it all back. The smell of oil and hot metal can take me right there. We drove that tank again after they fixed the track. We fought more battles, but something changed in us that day. The armored confidence was gone, shattered along with the French countryside. We weren't invincible giants anymore. We were just 5 men in a metal box, trying to get through the next minute, the next hour, hoping to see home again.